For years, people looked up to Pastor John P. Key as a strong voice of faith, music, and leadership. His songs played in churches around the world. His sermons gave people hope in hard times. Many believed he not only preached about faith, but lived it in every part of his life. People saw him as a family man, a spiritual guide, and a role model. His marriage, especially, looked perfect from the outside, a loving wife by his side, smiling through the spotlight. But you won't believe what was really happening behind those smiles. Let me tell you, this story isn't just another drama. It's deeper than that. For decades, Pastor Key's wife stood quietly beside him. No one really asked about her, and she never stepped forward to share her voice. Everyone thought she was simply happy, proud, and fulfilled. But that wasn't the full truth. Behind closed doors, she was living a very different life, one full of sacrifice, silence, and deep emotional struggles. From the outside, everything looked great. Pastor Key was leading a growing ministry, releasing hit after hit in gospel music, and gaining respect all over the world. People praised his devotion to God and his family, but this is how public images can hide private pain. His wife stayed silent for years, but now, after carrying the weight for so long, she finally decided to speak out, and what she revealed shook everyone. She said their marriage had not been the peaceful journey people imagined. In fact, it had been full of loneliness, emotional distance, and a sense of being forgotten. She was not just the wife of a pastor. She was the woman who carried the home while her husband carried the church. He was often away, either preaching or traveling for music, and she stayed behind, not just to raise the children, but to hold herself together while feeling invisible. But here is the shocking part. She never complained publicly. She smiled in pictures, supported her husband in front of the crowd, and acted like everything was fine, all while her own needs, dreams, and voice were quietly fading. She admitted that sometimes she felt like a shadow in her own life. While Pastor Key was being praised on stages and pulpits, she was crying alone in her room, asking God if anyone saw her pain. Still, she didn't give up. She kept praying, supporting her family, and hoping things would change. But deep inside, she was breaking. This is where it gets interesting. Despite everything, she didn't come forward to blame. She didn't speak out to destroy her husband's image. She came forward to tell the truth about her journey, a journey of sacrifice, silence, and strength. What makes this story different? It's not just about a man of God facing personal struggles. It's about the woman who stood behind him for years, the one no one noticed, finally telling her side. And once she started speaking, the truth couldn't be hidden anymore. People started asking, how did we never see this coming? After the first part of her story came out, people were stunned. Fans couldn't believe that behind the powerful sermons and joyful worship songs, such a painful reality had existed. Many asked how someone like Pastor John P. Key, a man who taught others about love, commitment, and family, could have missed the emotional weight his wife had been carrying. But as she continued speaking, the picture became even more complicated. The craziest part, even when she was surrounded by people in the church, she still felt alone. She explained how the ministry had become the center of their world. Everything revolved around it. Sunday services, prayer meetings, music tours, conferences, they all demanded time, energy, and attention. Pastor Key was constantly being pulled in every direction. And while everyone else saw his schedule as a sign of dedication, his wife began to see it as a wall, one that was slowly separating her from the man she married. She shared how she spent countless nights waiting, not just for his return home, but for a real conversation, for his full attention, for some emotional connection. But often, when he was home, he was still far away, mentally exhausted, or preparing for the next sermon. She wasn't just living in his shadow, she was becoming invisible in her own home. Destiny took an unexpected turn when she realized that her silence wasn't protecting her anymore. It was hurting her. She tried to speak up gently at first, hoping he would see her pain, but every time his answer was the same. God's work comes first. That sentence cut deeper than he realized. Yes, she believed in God's work too. She had stood by him through every stage of his ministry. But what about their marriage? What about her? What about the promise they made to each other before the ministry ever became big? There were moments when she thought of walking away, not because she didn't love him, but because she had completely lost herself. She couldn't recognize the woman in the mirror anymore. The smiles at church felt fake. The quiet tears at night felt endless. And still she kept holding on, thinking maybe things would get better. But time kept moving and her pain kept growing. Let me tell you, this wasn't a simple story of distance or misunderstandings. This was a story about emotional survival, a woman fighting to keep her marriage alive while also trying not to lose herself in the process. And even as she opened up about the most painful parts of their marriage, she did it with grace. Not to shame her husband, but to finally tell the truth. Because what makes this story different is how long the silence lasted. Years went by, holidays, anniversaries, children growing up, all while she was quietly sacrificing parts of herself. And all the while, the world was clapping for Pastor Key, thinking they knew the full story. But now that story was being rewritten, not by a scandal, but by the raw, honest words of a woman who had finally found the courage to speak. As her story reached more people, the reaction was louder than anyone expected. Fans who had grown up listening to Pastor Key's music and watching his sermons were left in disbelief. Many didn't know how to feel. Some were heartbroken, others angry, and some simply confused. How could a man known for spreading messages of hope and love have been so disconnected from the one person who stood by him the longest? But here is the shocking part. Even in the middle of this emotional storm, she still spoke with love. She didn't try to tear him down. She wasn't bitter or full of hate. Instead, she was honest. She said clearly that Pastor Key had done many great things for others, and she had never stopped being proud of his work. But she also said that those great things came with a price, and sadly, she had paid much of it in silence. Her words weren't just about their marriage anymore. They became something bigger, a voice for other women, for silent partners, for those who had also put their lives on pause to support someone else's calling. And this is where it gets interesting. She revealed that even while she was suffering emotionally, she still stayed deeply involved in the ministry. She was the one making sure things at home didn't fall apart. She helped raise their children with love and faith. She prayed for her husband's success. But she admitted that deep down, she had also prayed for herself, for strength to not give up, for peace in her heart, and for a sign that her voice still mattered. What people didn't know was that she had sacrificed not just her time, but her dreams. She once had goals of her own, a life beyond just being the pastor's wife. But slowly, those dreams faded into the background. She told how sometimes she felt like her purpose was only to serve his, as if her own identity no longer existed. That kind of emotional emptiness can break even the strongest people. And for a while, it almost broke her too. You won't believe what she shared next. She said there were times when she would sit alone in the church, the same church where people came to find healing, and feel completely empty, surrounded by hope, yet holding on by a thread. The same messages that brought others peace left her feeling disconnected because she knew the truth behind the scenes. She had to smile at people, give advice, lead other women, all while battling her own pain. And still, she kept quiet. But one day, something changed. She decided that silence wasn't strength anymore. Honesty was. She sat down for an interview, not because she wanted attention, but because she wanted to be free. She wanted to stop pretending. She wanted people to understand that even the strongest marriages, the most admired families, can have cracks, not because of hate, but because of neglect, distance, and unmet needs. And when she spoke, the world listened. Suddenly, It wasn't just about Pastor John P. Key's image. It was about the real story, the one no one saw coming. The craziest part? Her truth didn't just challenge his reputation, it shook the way people looked at love, faith, and family. After the interview, everything changed. Not just for her, but for Pastor John P. Key too. The public was still trying to make sense of it all, but behind the scenes, something deeper was happening. For the first time in years, Pastor Key was forced to sit with the truth. Not the truth from the pulpit, but the truth from his own home. And this is how it all began to shift. He had always been the voice for others, the man with answers, the one who prayed for healing. But now, he had to face the wounds in his own house. And what makes this story different? He didn't deny it. He didn't attack her or call her wrong. Instead, he listened. He sat down, read her words, watched the interview, and finally saw the pain he had missed for so long. It shook him, not because he didn't love her, but because he realized he had loved her through the lens of ministry, not intimacy. Destiny took an unexpected turn when he started stepping back from some of his public duties to focus on healing his home. He started having real conversations with his wife, not about the church, not about appearances, but about her, about how she felt, what she needed, and who she wanted to be outside of just his partner. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't just heard, she was seen. They began going to counseling, not to fix what was broken instantly, but to understand where they had drifted. And even though the road was not easy, it was real. There were tears, awkward silences, even moments when they almost gave up. But each time, they remembered one thing. They had built a life together, and if there was still love, there was still something to fight for. Let me tell you, this wasn't about a perfect ending. It wasn't about saving face. It was about facing the truth, even when it was uncomfortable. Pastor Key stood before his congregation and addressed the situation. He didn't make excuses. He talked about growth, about how even men of God can fall short at home, and how the real test of faith isn't just how well you preach. It's how well you love the ones closest to you. The congregation was silent, many with tears in their eyes, because for years they had seen a pastor. That day, they saw a man, a husband, a father, a person who was finally willing to admit he needed help too. His wife, on the other hand, began rebuilding herself. She started speaking at women's events, not as the quiet woman in the background, but as someone who had walked through pain and came out stronger. Her words gave life to others who had been silent for too long, and slowly, the narrative changed. This wasn't a scandal anymore. It was a story of rediscovery, of two people, deeply flawed, but still trying, still choosing love in a world that often expects perfection. And maybe that's the real miracle. Not the songs, not the sermons, but the courage to say, we hurt, but we healed. We broke, but we're still standing. So while the headlines faded, their journey continued. Not in the spotlight, but in the quiet places where real love is tested, and where it either fades or grows stronger. And the craziest part? In telling her story, she not only found her own healing, she gave him a second chance to truly become the man she always believed he could be. This is where it ends, not in drama, but in truth. Not in destruction, but in hope. Because sometimes, when everything falls apart, it's not the end. It's just the beginning.